Yeah, yeah. Just whenever you want. anything specifically, inherently configurably wrong with Windows or with the way the client set it up, other than the idea of privileged, or at least, or the principle of least privilege. My apologies. That's the only thing that can come into play here. Just to kind of give that awareness, if Molly shouldn't have access to this file system specifically, constrained delegation is actually the preferred one over unconstrained delegation. You can do some really funky stuff with unconstrained delegation, but I figured constrained delegation is a little bit less seen as a lateral movement technique, so I thought this would be pretty cool to show off. So now what can we do? We can, dir the system. That's kind of lame. What else could we do? Well, we can actually come in here, and instead of just accessing it for the CIF service, like I said, we can actually do an alt service. Since we have the access to change the properties, one of the things we can do is we can actually change this to the HTTP service. I guess the best way to explain this, why we would do it for the alt service, is the next thing we're going to do is WinRM. WinRM is very cool, and there's a sharp WinRM binary that I love to use. I love to use C# binaries because they're very easy to ingest. You can do MS build, you can do a bunch of other fun things. But once you have the service ticket for HTTP, you can actually access the WinRM protocol. So as long as it's open and as long as it's a server that has that supported, you can actually access that. So one of the things I like to do after identifying what most commonly is in place, which is the CIF service, I actually like to access a different service. So we can access the HTTP service. And unfortunately, it looks like I typed it in wrong or something. Let me go ahead and back this up because I didn't successfully import. Let me go ahead and do PTT at this. It did not alt service. This is annoying. Why did it not let me do that? Oh, because this is the old one without the proper MSDN. All right, there we go. Now we can do alt service HTTP. Awesome. Now we have the WinRM binary and all that other fun stuff. Actually, we don't because I think it deleted it. Let me go ahead and do this. Oh, we do. I didn't use it, so it didn't delete it. So now we can do sharp WinRM. We can do, let's say, fso1.rake.local. And now that we have the ticket imported, we don't have to really provide anything else. We just need a host name and command. So we can do who am I. This doesn't actually give you any output, but it did run. Once you see this process ID and all this other information, this is just what's getting returned by WinRM after something successfully run. WinRM natively doesn't give you command output. Well, one of the cool things we can do here is you can actually spin up whatever CT you'd like. I'm going to do connect today. We're going to do run connect 192.168.1.15. Actually, let me go ahead and figure out. I'm 15, aren't I? Yeah, I am. Okay. Just to make sure that we don't have any issues. I'm just using Connect because that's what I'm familiar with. It's my C2, and you probably should use it at some point. Well, Connect V2 is coming out, by the way, just for a short plug, but let me go ahead and do this, stagers, and we're going to grab the mshta payload command. So like now that we have access to sharp WinRM, instead of just having access to the file share, we can actually have access to WinRM. And once you run this command, if everything runs successfully, we get an HTA requested and we get a successful connection. That's awesome. Now, if we look and we go to connections, we go to the specific connection itself, we type in maybe sysinfo. This should return what? Administrator, and it should return hostname FSO1, which is super cool. We went from just being mconnect on workstation 01 as local admin to full-blown domain administrator on FSO1. So like that's awesome. Now we can't really use that domain administrator context outside of FSO1 because FSO1 trusts mconnect. The domain doesn't trust mconnect to push service tickets. So now you can see as this returns, we're the administrator on Rake, and we're FSO1. So this is awesome. So now we can pretend to do domain administrator stuff on FSO1. One of the things we can do natively now is we can actually run MS build within Connect. MS build is a technique that executes C# binaries. One of the things I have on my local system is that same repository that I showed you guys earlier that we downloaded MS build from, or Rubius from. So I can go back there again. If I remember where it's at, we have Binsmaster, C#, credentials, we have Rubius, and we're going to do the same thing that we did earlier where we did the dump to see all the TGTs. And like I mentioned earlier, if a administrator logs in interactively, what should happen? Well, the TGT for that administrator should be generated into the session, because if you log in interactively, it needs to basically pull down the TGT or the service ticket for term serve, which is the resource for RDP. So if you log in interactively via RDP with administrator credential like domain administrator or any user specifically, you need to be able to have the term serve service ticket to basically be able to RDP other places. So if we go up here, we can actually see that we have looks like we have the machine account, and that's awesome. We don't have, let me try to rerun this again. Just while we're doing this, I'm going to basically pull up Firefox and try to log in interactively with the main administrator real quick, because I already have it pulled up. So let me go ahead and do this. This is going to be pretty cool. You guys can see live it actually being injected into the session. So let me try to switch user just to make sure that this is the actual administrator. It looks like administrator.rake.local. So we're signing in interactively, which is super bad. And we can actually type in the administrator's password. And since we're signing in interactively, like I said before, it needs to pull in the term serve. Let me just make sure I type it in super slow and we actually get it. This is awesome. Perfect. Okay, so now we come back over here, and now if we drop TGTs again, we should be able to see the administrator's TGT now imported in the session, which would be super cool. Go ahead and scroll up. Awesome. Now we have the administrator's TGT. Like we said, it had to import the TGT to basically pull down the service ticket for term serve, and now we can actually use this. So if I go ahead and grab this, I did not mean to paste that there. I don't know why I pasted like that at all. We can actually grab this, and then I can click auto connect. We don't need connect anymore because now that we have the TGT, I can go ahead and remove. I think just to make sure, yeah, we don't have temp in here at all. So I can vim temp. We can go ahead and paste the TGT in here, and we have to make it into a format. You can see this is the base64 encoded version of the Kirby. There's two different formats for TGT. There's the Kirby, that's the Windows format for TGTs, and there's also Ccache, which is the Linux version of TGTs. We need to convert this not only from base64 to Kirby, but also from Kirby to Ccache. And fortunately, as you guys will see, now that we have this in the temp file, we're going to remove a bunch of things. So cat temp, we'll trim all the spaces, and we'll also trim all the new lines, and then we'll also base64 decode it. Now that we've done all this format right here is actually going to be temp.kirby. So now that we have temp.kirby, we can use a really cool module from the Impact repository and convert this from temp.kirby to temp.ccache, which is the Linux version. And so now that we've done that successfully, one of the ways that you can use TGTs on a Linux system is exporting the environment variable KRB5cc name and exporting that to the Ccache file. So you're just pointing that at the Ccache file. Now, if you use any Impact module, regardless if it's in this directory, it will use the Ccache file for authentication. So now that we have the domain administrator's TGT because he logged into our box, what can we do? We can sign in to the domain controller with wmi-exec. And I'm just going to look at my history real quick. History grep wmi just to kind of speed this up a little bit. It looks like I was signing in, blah, blah, blah. Let me go ahead. rake.dev. We're going to do the administrator, and then we're also going to do at the domain controller. It looks like I actually don't have it in here, but you guys can see all. Why is that? We'll go ahead and type in rake.dev administrator at 192.168.102, and then we're going to do TAC K. So this is typically the configuration for all in packet modules. If you type in TAC-K, it'll use the C cache. You also type in no pass, so you don't get prompted for password authentication. And then you can click enter, and then it says connection refused. Okay, one thing, and I actually just fell fault to it as well. When you're using Kerberos authentication, you need host names. It loves host names. When it's looking up things in its dictionary within the KDC, it's looking for host names. So we're gonna have to do dco1.rig.dev so it can actually find it. It's saying that rig.dev 445 is not found. Oh, because it's rig.local. This is great. And if all things go well, we'll have a domain administrator session via wmyexec. And then with DC, I'll just give it the DC IP because it looks like it's having some type of resolving issue. Awesome. Now I can do who am I? And we're the administrator. That's great. That is the long-winded assessment. My apologies for taking a decent while with the presentation for the assessment, but I thought that was pretty cool. I'm gonna pause real quick. We ran through a bunch of stuff. Is there any specific questions on the assessment? I think that was probably the best amount of information for the presentation. So I want to make sure that you guys understood what happened before we move forward.
So I guess so from operation of using Linux to do whether it's Kerberos or just 80 operations in general, how do you deal with time deltas? Because I know Kerberos sometimes gets upset about that. So if you have like an internal server that's slightly skewed by like an hour, how do you sync that normally?
Yeah, so there's a really cool GNU binary called NTP date. Essentially, what you want to do is do NPT or NTP date because you're correct. Kerberos does love to cry about Kerberos skews. You do NTP date, tag you, and you give it the domain. And now you have to edit your etc host file to point rate.local at something specific, like the domain controller, or you could just give it like the host name and then also put this in here. But then this will find an NTP server within the rig.local domain, or if you point it at a specific workstation like we're doing right now, it'll correlate. Yeah, I can actually go ahead and do this. I probably need sudo. I'll leave it like that just so we don't waste more time. But this will actually configure yourself with whatever specific NTP server is being used for the local domain. So like if you're on Hack the Box and you're doing Hack the Box stuff and it asks for Kerberos stuff, you can configure it specifically for that Kerberos server. Great
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other specific questions? I know we went over a lot. The main gist of things is TGTs are cool. TGTs allow you to authenticate as users. TGTs allow you to request service tickets for resources within the domain configured within Kerberos, which is also a mouthful, but that's the gist. So knowing that and moving forward, look up Kerberos, try to figure out ways that you can abuse it. Try to figure out. We did constrained delegation. There's also resource-based constrained delegation, which is a little harder, and there's also unconstrained delegation, which is a little easier. It's almost auto domain admin pwn for unconstrained delegation. You can actually use print nightmare, get on a system with unconstrained delegation, and get the DA's hash immediately, or the DG's or the DA's TGT. Which, like discussed, TGTs allow you to authenticate. So once you have that, you can authenticate back to the main controller as the DA. So just another tidbit of information.
I
Yeah.
did want to ask, is there an event where maybe you wouldn't want to use Kerberos authentication and maybe you'd want to like try to actually find hashes on the system?
That I think that's the biggest point here. I think moving forward, in previous scenarios, I've needed to authenticate to like other systems that only support NTLM authentication, which I guess kind of plays into the miscellaneous stuff for internal penetration testing, right? Like outside of what we're discussing right now, there's a huge miscellaneous tab that's like printers and other types of systems and software. So if they do need some type of specific NTLM authentication, maybe. But in those cases, you can really just use RPC client with Kerberos, or you could use some type of in packet module with Kerberos to request the NTLM hash from the domain controller and then authenticate after that. So there's really no case where you would want to access LSAS. You really always want to dump TGTs, not only because it doesn't throw too many alarms, but it's also like the natural order of things. That's really what's happening all the time is your users requesting their TGT anyways. So if they have special permissions, don't dump LSAS and try to get the clear text creds. Let's say we pop that box with them at 1710. We migrated to session 1, which is mconnect session. and we drop the TGT. Now we have access to that user and any other user that, for that matter, that's even interactively logged in. So
All right, nice. Thank you for explaining
yeah,
that.
no problem. If there are no other questions, we'll actually go over one of the vulnerabilities. I figured that assessment would take a lot less time, but I didn't want to cut it short. I thought that was super useful, and it's kind of a lot of the TTPs that I've really used over the years that have helped me pretty much be really successful in a lot of my engagements. One of the things that you would want to do after you're done explaining it is doing some type of executive summary. How I was going to wrap this in with the client engagement, which we mentioned almost an hour ago now, is tying in the client's goals within the executive summary. This is something huge. This is something that you're going to want to do on every single one of your assessments. For the specific client engagement, the client was very, or non-due diligent. They just wanted their box checked off. So the goal specifically here is getting access to system, software, and users. That's always the default. So when you're going through and explaining the executive summary, you're going to be basically go through and type in, whatever company you're working for. We're working for Zerg. Zerg performed an internal penetration test on whatever. I think in this case, I was going to galaxy.local or rake.local domain, right? And after they were able to perform that, we were able to attempt to gain access to systems, software, and users. And you'd probably refine this and users. However, this is essentially the gist. You're stating that you're doing an internal penetration test. The internal penetration test, insert blurb on what your methodology is, and then insert what the goals are with what you, gathered from the client engagement. That's why it's very useful to ask questions. That's where it's very important so that you can reflect that in the executive summary and they're not as surprised and they're starting to hear that repetitive message over and over and over again. After you're done going through the executive summary, you'll also want to kind of throw in a blurb about what we identified as, a root cause. This is going to be basically tying into some of our findings. In this specific scenario, I was going to ask for you guys to define this, but I'm just going to give it to you because we're pressed for time. We identified a user security awareness vulnerability. That's one of the root causes that we identified. With a user security awareness, that specific root cause allows you to tie that to a specific business unit. There's a training department in most organizations, and this is going to allow the brain to start flowing for the CISO if he's on the call or she's on the call, or whoever's going to be reporting to them, to basically be able to explain that. So within the findings, you're going to want to essentially list the root causes, user security awareness. When you start to touch on that, that's the thing you immediately go to. Hey, this vulnerability has to do with some type of malperformed training, malinformed training within your organization, and the remediation steps are going to follow, trying to involve implementing some additional training or additional methodologies within your training program to allow users to become more aware. This also falls with phishing, but then in this case, this was just weak passwords. If you do curb roasting, that also falls within this. Another finding that we also identified during this was principal least privilege. Molly is not a sysadmin. She's not a file share admin. She's not a database admin. She's just a regular user, and she doesn't need access to FSO1. That's a little bit of more data than we actually found, but I'm just kind of giving you guys that. That specific case would actually be configuration management. That's another root cause. And what you're going to be able to do there is once you start explaining that vulnerability, you immediately dive into that executive summary. You immediately dive into, hey, this vulnerability has to do with configuration management. Configuration management is an issue within, a configuration for a specific user that wasn't in line with what your guys' security standards currently are. It's a great way to explain it. It's a great way to kind of explain any configuration management issue. Let's say if it's MS 1710, or if there was some type of HTTP headers, let's go to a more remedial configuration management vulnerability. You can explain it in the same way. You can say, hey, this is a configuration management vulnerability. It has to do with a system that has a configuration that's not properly aligned with your security standards. You can start to see how this kind of repeats itself and how you can use root causes to kind of tie that into specific business risk and to relay that executive manner and executive summary for all of your vulnerabilities, including the report, and allow you to actually be very consistent throughout all of your findings. Uh, Outside of this, if they do want a more specific detailed approach to some of these findings, then you can do that. But however, like I mentioned before, a lot of these findings can be summarized into some type of root cause and tied to some type of business risk, and you can save yourself a lot of time by just explaining it with the root cause and maybe even a CVS SV2 score with explaining how that works and how you rated that criticality and why they should focus on some vulnerabilities over others. That's it for me, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the talk. I know it was a lot. I'm super passionate about this stuff. So if you guys have any questions or you guys want to find out more, feel more than free to reach out. I'm always willing to help, and I think that this stuff is awesome, and I think it can be really cool at some points in times. I know it can get mundane, but you can be really successful in some of these careers. So like I said, I'm more than willing to help. So that's it for me. Are there any
Awesome.
questions?
I got one,
Awesome.
but
Thank you.
to start out with, you, thank you so much for giving the talk. That was awesome. Have you done the Red Team Ops course before?
Are you talking about CRTO?
By 0 Point Security, Red
Yeah.
Team Ops?
Yeah.
Because
I have not.
it's kind of crazy. Like the stuff you showed was like exactly what they teach in the course. So it's awesome to see
Okay,
the course like,
that makes
actually
me feel better.
like super real life stuff. Yeah. So
Well, I
like
appreciate that.
this and grabbing tickets and using curb route to get all that stuff. Yeah, it was awesome.
That's great. I appreciate you bringing that up. I have taken OSEP. I'm in the current process of taking OSEP, but I'll have to take a look at that. I'm glad that they're starting to integrate some of that methodology within their training because it definitely is super useful. I think that utilizing what is ingrown into Active Directory and utilizing that as it was supposed to be is definitely the way to go. So I'm glad to hear that.